Fifth podcast. What does the number 5 represent to you, gentlemen?
Some Yankees player.
Absolutely nothing.
I don't remember.
Remember Jason Kidd. He owns 5 in my mind.
Was he 5?
I think it's 5.
Who was it?
We'll know in the comments.
Was it Musial 5? No.
I'm gonna look it up. But this is our 5th podcast. That's why I'm talking about the number 5. So thank you for
Roger Maris.
Roger Maris. Our 5th podcast. Jake, what's the topic of the 5th podcast? Can you tell everybody how awesome 5 is gonna be?
Well, it's going to be really awesome because we're going to talk about the difference between powerlifting and bodybuilding.
Is there a difference between powerlifting and bodybuilding, Jake? Is there, Jake?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. So I'd say it depends, just like everything else.
Ben?
I'm just upset that I got that wrong. He was number 9.
Oh, wow. Is there a difference? Is there not a difference? Let's discuss these things.
Yes.
In depth, deep depth.
Tonight on Physiology and Philosophy.
Brandon was trying to get us that music. We need to pick up music for this episode. All right, so we're going to go over a few things, and it's pretty simple. And some of this was from your input. Thank you for some of you who interacted on Twitter and the Instagrams. So we're going to talk about the trend, essentially. Let's start off there. So I think the person who would give the best history on this from where it comes from to where it's been, Ben has, out of all of us, has been around powerlifting longest. He's not the master of powerlifting, but he's been around longer than everyone in this room. So what would you say, we just got done with Raw National, so what would you say the progression you've seen with the trend, I guess the why, and not even the why and how, just how you've seen the insane explosion in powerlifting?
Well, first, before I answer that, I do have to disclose that, it's laughable to everybody who knows Matt Gary to say that, I
had him on my mind, and that's why I said it in this room.
He's got a multiple of 4 on me. I think it's been 5 years for me. And I'm sure Matt would say there's many others who have much more than him. But I got started when I was 23. So I'm almost 30 now, so this would be about 7 years ago. And it was, I think the most fascinating part about it was that it was very backyard-esque at that time. I remember the first meet I ever did, we were in a hotel basement, and now,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was you get the electrical room of the hotel.
Now we have multiple ballrooms to weigh in, and
shameful.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was awesome. I mean, immediately.
Number 1 rule of USAPL: you don't talk about USAPL.
Well done. And I think for that year, by that point, man, and anybody who really is up on USAPL stuff is gonna totally roast me on this, which is fine. But I'll do my best to be as accurate as possible. I think at that point, again, 7 years ago, this was only the 3rd Raw Nationals they ever had. And the qualifying total, or I think the top 3 in the 198 class it was back then, was in the 1500s. And now, I think 1500s this time was maybe top 20? No,
yeah.
Would you break top 10 is the question.
You wouldn't break top 10 with 1500 this year. I think, so I can only go off of me. We're talking the 93s. I finished
which used to be 6. The 198s, yeah.
I finished 6, and I finished with 1650. That's 6th place. And I think the lowest Wilks in top 10, I think it was 440 or something. It was just out of hand.
So I guess so we can move on from this point. I'll try to accelerate it. The main things I remember personally, and actually anybody who wants the in-depth history, there's actually a really well-written series on the Titan website, I believe, which tracks the whole history of raw powerlifting pretty much. Wow. And USAPL, the foundation of that. There's also a YouTube video called Power Unlimited, which is really good. And that tracks the whole history, and it's visual. It's a lot if you don't want to read, but you should read. So anyway, after that disclosure, I remember the presence at that point was gear heavy, which it's kind of ironic to think about that now because it's totally flopped.
Yeah.
Where basically a lot of the intent was to push you towards, like, yeah, you train raw sometimes, but I was at least getting the push towards, trying to get into gear because that's what the bigger event was, and that's where, the more competitive people competed. Like even like Mike Teixeira.
I've seen some pictures of him.
Oh yeah, he was a very prominent geared lifter, and I don't even know if he still does. I just know him from raw, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been, man, to see it from there and to tie it into like bodybuilding, like you talked about, is it's experiencing that wave of like the era of pre-bodybuilding.com forums versus post-bodybuilding.com forums, and then social media explosion. Is bodybuilding grew with it, and for whatever reason, probably CrossFit and everything else, powerlifting is now exploding.
One thing Jake and I kind of were kind of thinking of this topic earlier. It was kind of like, how is that even possible? Like what is going on that people have, and a lot of it has become mostly from my end. Jake had an example how you only see like really bodybuilders.
Yeah. I guess we were talking about. That was mainly talking about like crossover. So how a lot of people really want to do both now. And it was just kind of interesting to note. It seems like bodybuilders seem to want to cross over into powerlifting a lot more, whereas powerlifters who start powerlifting don't seem to really want to venture into bodybuilding so much.
And I think like that for me, that kind of tied into like our last podcast. If anybody listened to the the one before the last one, I think it was institution one. I'm not sure. But I can say for me as an example, like when I came into powerlifting, I felt like a new sense of freedom, really. Like you kind of get in and you dabble and you're like, oh well, it feels good, I'm just doing this to help my physique. And then you get to a point where you realize I realized I was lying to myself. I wasn't doing this to help my physique. Like I was just doing it because it was just more fun than bodybuilding. And I felt the sense of like self-empowerment from it, because like I said, I didn't need there is strict judges, but I didn't need 7 judges to tell me, and I beg them after the show and thank them and be humble and grateful for their opinion of me, as opposed to just going in the gym and doing it myself.
Well, I think the thing that really pulled me in was the fact that you are being assessed objectively. You either completed the weight. I mean, obviously you can split this a little bit because there is subjective in the judging of the, getting lights, but like it has nothing to do with how your quads attach or how pretty, one of the 7 or all 7 people think they are. So you can specifically tailor your training for an outcome, whereas bodybuilding, you still don't necessarily know, because depending on that 7 set of opinions, they might all have a different idea of what, the optimal physique is. Right. So that was a big thing for me, because you can set up a much better intervention based on having a much clearer endpoint.
What were you going to say a little earlier? Right before he made that point? Because I don't want to move on without you.
I think I might have lost it. I'm not sure. I was just listening to Ben.
So I think this is a good time to tie one of these in. Kind of like what you just were on topic with, and we have someone on Instagram ask a question. Let me pull up the question.
Bring in the Instagram caller.
Let's bring in the Instagram caller. Caller
at hashtag.
And the question is, and I'm sorry, dude, this dude's name is Golan Strong. I'm not going to answer the question directly because I can't, and I don't think we can, but I will give you a good answer. The question says, how much hypertrophy work do you think is quote optimal unquote for a natural strength athlete to continue to increase work capacity and muscular size. How much I don't know. We would have to know what your training is, so I can't say just a random number of how much, because it's relative to you. But I think there is a kind of a better answer, and it's not the direct answer you're looking for, but it will be food for thought. And this question reminds me of sort of like, I asked myself that as well too, because I could do a lot. I could do 2 sessions a day, but I don't have the lifestyle to do double sessions a day, or like I could do. So I've backed off on what is optimal, and that's a hard thing to answer because of a sustainability perspective. Most of us, we literally don't have the time to do all full powerlifting blocks and then get off and do your regular sustainable levels of volume for hypertrophy. And I think not only on like a physiological level, but like a life and career sustainability level. Jake, earlier you said something that was great. You said powerlifting is physically
oh yeah. So I was actually the thought actually was generated by someone else on Instagram, and this is totally personal, but to me, and I haven't done a powerlifting meet, but I have competed in bodybuilding. To me, bodybuilding seems more like passive suffering, which is I feel like I'm a little bit better at, which is like weird to say, like you're good at suffering, but it's more like you're taking something
last
away.
Man standing, more so.
Yeah, it's like I can subject myself to not having something. Like I can take food away and I can just passively sit and say, okay, I'm not going to eat that. And then I eat it. Yeah, and then Ben eats it, and everybody's happy except me. On the other hand, I feel like powerlifting and where it's a little bit newer to me, and it's not to say you can't have aches and pains during bodybuilding training, but where that's a little newer to me and pushing those 3 main lifts so hard is just that it's more like active suffering, and you have to participate in that moment in the
hurt.
Yeah, the pain of that training session. And again, that's not to say you can't do both, but to me, I don't know that it would be sustainable to do both and have that extreme passive suffering combined with the active suffering of powerlifting. I kind of feel like it would break me down personally, and I feel like there's a lot of people that or it's become a little bit more popular to crossover, but is that always a good idea? Perhaps not for everybody. Seems to work for some more than others.
So I think that question, because the word that kind of made it hard to answer directly was optimal, and I kind of like what Jake said, because optimally doing both, I don't know if you can. I know you definitely have to favor one more than the other from a sustainability standpoint, especially not only mentally but physiologically. Some people can, don't get me wrong. Like we were talking about Jesse Norris and Doug Miller. Like we've all seen the volume they do. Like that's great, it's a lot, but I couldn't do it, and most of us can't.
And you have to think about what are your other obligations in life and the time commitment of that, and like you said, psychologically as well. So that was my initial thought going into I guess powerlifting and training the 3 main lifts more frequently. Okay, so I can do this, but why not do both? And I just clung to that very heavily. But you have to ask, one, if you want to be really want to be a better power lifter, and you're doing all this hypertrophy work, say for back and shoulders, that's not to say that won't help, but at some point you're going to have to increase your volume of the three main lifts to a certain amount where, well, maybe if I got rid of those other days where I'm doing things that are not specific to powerlifting, like, or as specific, like an overhead press or something, and I just bench press instead, like if I just use that time to do more specific work,
the specificity would carry over, and you'd be better powerlifter.
That would be better. And again, going back to so it's literally just a time commitment, and psychologically, are you going to be motivated to go into the gym like that many extra days of the week to just do, I guess what you come to call like fluff work, just like the accessory stuff? And for me, I was starting to realize that it was just too many days of training. Like I couldn't get motivated. I would go in and train shoulders, and then the next day I have to like squat, bench, deadlift, and be like, now I don't have the motivation to do this.
In the perfect professional athlete environment, it could be done. But
certainly that's the only thing.
Well, yeah. There's so much to say. Like I was literally, I'll try my best. I was, my initial thought was we got a huge pizza pie here, and we're gonna do, how many slices do we want? We want 16?
No, I think we're gonna do about 14 slices.
All right, I'll try to do my best to stick my finger in all 14 of them. Trauma strong. Anyway, my first thought was, and I'll try to draw some parallels here, so it's not again abstract, but was that you need to almost go into your programming for whatever purpose, whether it's athletic ability, so like you play a sport and you're training for that, whether it's powerlifting, whether it's bodybuilding, you need to go into it with the same mental approach as a chemist would be who wants to create the most pure product. So if you're looking at your investment of time, let's just say that we're making, just because it's the easiest one in my mind right now, let's say we're making something like alpha-lipoic acid in the lab, which I'm getting way off topic, but anyway, and I will bring it together. I promise. So a normal, and I just know this because of supplements, normally you can get it cheaper if you get a mixture, which is called a racemic mixture of 50% one isomer, 50% the other. You can do that, but if you want the isomer that works better physiologically, you have to spend more time refining that process to only get that isomer. So my point in saying that is that you have to look at it the same way, in that if you want a more pure end product for a very specific purpose, you're going to have to spend more time in refining that. You can get both, but if you want the maximum purity, which for the example of this analogy would be performance or placing or anything like that. And I mean, I realize this is common sense, but I do think sometimes people dive into physique competition and say, this is what everybody's doing, I love both, I want to excel in both, and then it's like just pulled two separate. So they're spinning their wheels, basically. The other thing is, if you look at it from the perspective of, let's just step back and observational, I guess, data from everybody who watches pro sports, is you can't sit here and tell me that like LeBron James wouldn't be awesome at other, other strength power activities, or like Bo Jackson wasn't great at other strength power activities. He just chose those certain ones that he wanted to excel in, and although Bo didn't train, so he was a terrible, but you get my point. Like Usain Bolt wouldn't just be good at sprinting in a straight line. So there are things that make people universally good, and there are things that if you decide that you want to be best at, you are going to have to kind of make a choice at some point if you want to be elite. And then we could break it down into muscle physiology things too.
I was just going to say, so this is kind of our opinion. I guess to those opinions, solidify them kind of with some physiology on how that would be hard to be, I guess, optimal at, well, I guess, no, well, that's getting off. I was going to say technically, even if you're kind of good at one, it's as optimal as you can be given that you're good at the other one. So there is...
Well, here's where you start to you can get into hair splitting to a certain degree, but on a more broad level, what are you really looking at? Like if it's like in physics, you draw a free body diagram where you're just looking at the forces and trying to ignore like the finer things. Like let's step back and look at the big thing, which is number one is obviously fiber typing is going to have a huge impact on that. Number two is joint segment lengths, another huge thing. So with powerlifting, although structure is important in bodybuilding, the major thing in powerlifting is it can make you play significantly different if you have a very skewed what's called curl index, which is like the length of your tib fib versus your femur. Whereas in bodybuilding, if the muscle looks good, it might not knock you that bad. Or if you can hide it in posing, things like that. So that's another factor is joint segment length. So obviously these are things that most people know just as soon as you start lifting weights. Like I'm tall, this feels harder for me versus this short dude who's repping it out like a machine.
You know your biomechanics and
yes.
powerlifting quickly.
One of my favorite statements ever from my grad school biomechanics teacher is that we're basically all biomechanists. It's just you have to learn how to explain it appropriately. Absolutely. In the in the lexicon of that or whatever technical speak of that, but and then other simple muscle characteristics like pennation angle, which is basically what angle the fibers attach from bone to bone, and it actually makes a huge difference. Like if you have a greater pennation angle, you typically have better strength. So this is why, and it's actually good that we kind of brought this up, because we can hopefully answer another question that maybe is sitting in people's minds, but they're not directly thinking of right now, which is like, well, why does this guy have 35-inch quads and this guy has 30, but he's squatting more than this guy? It's deeper than just muscle size. Yeah, you're looking at, it's in part, it's an engineering kind of model that you're looking at as well, engineering, physics, whatever. So yeah, those are some of the primary things, and I'm sure there's things I'm forgetting too. So if you guys have anything else to add to that.
As far as just physiology?
I just like outside factors, like broad scale factors.
Not really.
Okay, so you don't have to go in. We can move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say also, like, we talk about programming a lot in this house, and we've talked about programming a ton. And one thing, like, I was discussing with everything I discussed with Jake already. Everything I was discussing with Jake the other day, and we discussed this a lot because we saw this. We saw Dr. Zordos give a talk at NSCA this summer, and he explained that like DUP is not just daily undulating periodization; it's daily undulating programming. So you don't have, like, DUP isn't just powerlifting, and it has this connotation that it's just powerlifting. So I think, like, physiologically, when people say, like...
do you want to keep going?
Absolutely.
Keep going, then.
I think that I decided I wanted to keep going, and I don't.
Lies.
So, I guess... where I would pick up from there would be that if you look at a lot of the data that we do have, and admittedly, I haven't really stayed up on it. I browse for new data, but Dr. Zordos would be much better, to review that. However, the one thing that we do see is that as volume increases, it's not just strength going up. Hypertrophy is too. So they are intimately tied variables. So I know sometimes people like to think of them as these two mutually exclusive things that, I'm just a bodybuilder. I'm not going to DUP. God, I hate it even just saying it to myself. I'm not going to use DUP programming because I just want to get bigger. No. Like you're forgetting that, and I, even when I've answered this question for people initially before this type of programming got so popular, the analogy I would give them is when you first started lifting weights, did you only get one? Like, did you just get really strong and nothing happened to you, like phenotype wise? Of course not.
You can start doing push-ups as a teenager and get both.
Right. Yeah. And so so the other thing I said, the one thing I did forget to mention is, we said fiber typing, which does go in hand with fiber size, but a larger muscle can contract with more force too. So obviously someone who is bigger. So what I'm getting at in saying that is, if you hypertrophy, you will increase strength. Now, where the separation happens, going back to the chemist example, is now you can shift into which one you want to push more towards. So what would change in daily undulating periodization is you would just change your distribution of endpoint goals, but you're still training everything, because the limitation of doing traditional linear periodization is you stay in one phase for either an entire block or multiple mesocycles, and then you get out, so you detrain that variable, and now you train something else. Whereas when you undulate within a week, you get to keep more of all of them because you're not detraining. So the stimulus for multiple things is better within a small cycle. So getting back to the main point is, that's why it's wrong to think of like, well, I should only DUP when I'm training to be a powerlifter or strength trainer. Yeah. It's just, you just literally, it's a model. It's a model that describes almost an infinite number of programs. Anyway, I'll move.
I think that's weird because that's always been, well, as long as we've been Homo sapiens, it's always worked that way. Like, we may just be finding out now or realizing that now. But it's weird because I think it kind of goes back to like the opening statement when we said like, yeah, it's weird. Like, why are bodybuilders getting into this? And I think it's just weird. It's almost like this weird catch-22. So it's like, well, okay, well, a bodybuilder here's, hey man, have you been training for 10 years? You want to get bigger? Try out powerlifting style.
It's become the new supplement
and
programming.
And people's physiques are changing, incorporating,
no doubt,
powerlifting style programming.
No doubt.
But I think here's the sort of weird powerlifting trick, is that while you're in
five weird tricks.
five weird tricks, perhaps. Check out this weird trick. So weird. While you're telling yourself like, oh yeah, I'm here for the result. I'm here for the big legs. I'm the bodybuilder guy. Is that while you're here for the big legs and the barrel chest and things like that, and you are making that result, and you are making the results, you start realizing that, man, this affair is turned into like a true love.
It sucks you in.
And I think that's sort of the wave happening, and that's why the trend is happening, and that's why you see some really, really, really big names in let's just talk about natural bodybuilding.
Actually, just hold that for 1 second, because there's one thing I missed that I want to mention that I don't want people to make an assumption on, because when we are now kind of leaving the programming talk of it and moving on to something else, is that we often have people associate popular or successful powerlifters with DUP and assume that type of programming is what has gotten them strong, and we need to not overlook the fact that at the bottom line of it, if you want to get stronger, you don't need DUP. You don't need someone who writes DUP. You just need to adhere to the common core principles of adaptation and progress, which are, you need to increase volume over time. So basically just basic progressive overload. So it doesn't matter if you're doing linear programming. If you're adhering
over time,
yes. And basically if you keep that simple part of the requirement of adaptation in there, you'll keep progressing.
And that's what people don't get when there's a lot of guys who train off intuition and they have success, and they don't understand it. It's because they say things like, yeah, I just did that and then I just did more till I could do more. Like, and it's a form of
it doesn't need to be super advanced.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that really if we want to boil this down and extract the root, really three things that are driving what's making you stronger or better in your domain is volume, specificity, and frequency. And frequency and volume are tied together. So volume is just sets times reps times intensity times weight. So it's really not, it doesn't need to be that complicated. People kind of get worried in the, well, I'm doing pin presses this week, and then next week, and it's kind of like the whole conjugate view, like the West Side view of things. Not saying that it's the wrong way to do things, but it's kind of making you focus on the wrong variables. So anyway, please, if you remember what you were talking about before, move on. But I want people to understand that.
I have no idea what I was saying.
Something about bodybuilding and
oh yeah, absolutely. With bodybuilding, and I was saying that's part of the aggregate picture of the wave I know from the bodybuilding side.
It's sucking you in.
It's sucking in a lot of bodybuilders. Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, powerlifting is just awesome. It's not saying that it's grown because bodybuilders have gotten hip to it and they enjoy it. But a lot of people are getting into the sport, and I have to be honest. Like, the powerlifter is a totally different breed of person than the bodybuilder. Mm-hmm. I think it's super refreshing. Like, not only for the physiological benefits, but like the psychological benefits as well, because you go into this new place and a lot of people are finding this as like, wow, like you meet a group of people who, a lot of us got into bodybuilding or fitness or figure because we wanted to look a certain way. And if you care about your looks, regardless of what you think, like there's an underlying Freudian sex desire to it, is as in like we want to be, not like actual sex, but like we want to be presentable to sex. Like that is part of like physical prowess or attraction to it. It's just a very basic thing in us. And I think in powerlifting, I've just met a lot of people who are just there for pure sport. Like it has nothing to do with like looking a certain way or like presenting themselves. It's not aesthetic. The social aspect driven. Is not there of like wanting to look good and wanting to look your best and be accepted and look good to society. And powerlifters just roll up and just, I mean, they're attractive people, powerlifters, don't get me wrong, but you guys just don't like. It's a nice break mentally from the superficial.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I've always appreciated the difference, but I think what we're kind of seeing is the attraction to the people who maybe started bodybuilding in order to better understand why they were making bodybuilding progress, because you do get that in powerlifting, because the reality of it is if you don't really understand programming aside from using things that everybody else is using, once you kind of exhaust those options and you have to determine what's going to work better for you, you have to start to understand programming. Not, okay, I need to do this muscle group twice a week because I stopped responding to it. Okay, like you have to kind of break down into the nitty gritty. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think it kind of attract that more inquisitive kind of personality type. But the other thing too is that I do think what I've noticed is, and I can say this from a personal experience because I have done both, is there's a certain psychological appeal to going in and knowing that you're going to have to kind of progressively hit this same movement in that session, and it's not going to be easy, versus the usual logic, or not logic,
conventional wisdom.
Yeah, like the way you usually go into a bodybuilding workout is like, it's typically redundant, but it's not so much like I'm going to get fired. Like maybe you get fired up for the first set,
yeah,
and then you back off. Whereas this like needs to be a constant, consistent effort. And at some point, again, I can only speak for me, but that redundancy of bodybuilding training was not stimulating me psychologically, or I don't know, like I guess on a cerebral level. And that's really what that's where the hook for powerlifting came in for me, was like, okay, I can still make these results, you know, physique wise, but I'm gonna have to figure this out too. Yeah. Because this can be an advantage. Like, whereas in bodybuilding, how much you know, it's not ever really gonna make you beat Phil Heath unless you're already close. Whereas you definitely you can push yourself pretty far beyond, you know, performance wise. Just like, let's use Jesse as an example. Like, I'm not saying that Jesse has the most intricate, you know, sophisticated programming, but he's stronger than a lot of guys on drugs.
Yep. Jake, you all right over there?
Yeah. I just feel like I had a lot of stuff to say, and then you guys started talking.
Shit.
And I kind of forgot.
I'm sorry, we do that.
We do that when we dust. Sorry. I want to hear you talk though. I don't want to move on.
well, let's think about. Let's think about the tip of the iceberg of what thoughts you had, and then you'll probably.
I think you guys got him.
There's no way. I refuse to believe that. I know there's something in there.
I'm gonna throw Jake a bait. You ready for a bait?
No.
Ready for a bait, Guppy bait. Saul Reggie's in the room.
I guess one thing I thought of while you were talking was, so you mentioned, I guess, the redundancy of bodybuilding with respect to, or relative to, powerlifting. So I guess, well, what do you think about applying those same principles now that you have learned a little bit more about programming in the world of powerlifting, if you want to put it that way, or applying those to
bodybuilding, right?
Bodybuilding.
Well, I guess there's a lot of beauty in that, because that's kind of how we really got connected, if you think about it. And I think that's actually still an area that intrigues me now, of going back, because the reality is, like, I work with almost purely powerlifters at this point. So I do want to go and experiment with what I've learned from really, you know, the programming principles, or seen, you know, more teased out with the data I've seen in the past couple of years, and try to take that and purely, you know, take a bodybuilder and see how much I could do. Because I think that's an area to explore, because there's no doubt that given the magnitude of change you can see in a powerlifter with applying that level of specificity, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to make a pretty dramatic change in someone's physique. The major question is that, like, it's going to be a lot of volume, so that person's going to feel wrecked. And, like, that's the thing about, and you do see this a lot in bodybuilding, where there's a lot of joint, you know, issues and stuff like that. But if you look at a lot of the most popular bodybuilding programs, and I know, I can't speak for Doug, but I know I've heard his name associated with this one before, is German volume training. German volume training is super duper high volume. Yeah. It's usually like 10 by 10. So
per exercise for that day.
Right. And like, it doesn't matter what exercise that is. Like, imagine 10 by 10 squat. I've probably dabbled with that at some point, but like it's not. It's
even at like a proper, I don't know, is that like 65%?
And you're supposed to pick a compound exercise. So the magic in these popular programs is in those core principles, like I was saying. So that being said, I am intrigued by that. I think it's a good question for sure.
I think an important thing to consider, I guess, in bodybuilding is, using those same core principles, but also realizing you don't have 3 main lifts or whatever that you have to do. But you may have lifts that you like, and you can still focus on getting stronger in.
Yep.
And while you are, or maybe, very focused on, I guess, simply hypertrophy, it's not as if you won't gain hypertrophy or get something out of getting stronger or programming yourself to get stronger in a variety of movements. Because I think in the long term, as long as you do get stronger at something, that is going to help you,
of course,
accomplish more volume.
Of course. I think something also to add in there, I'm just trying to think of the things that either I thought of throughout, my journey thus far, or things that I've heard people say, when I did go to conventional gyms, is like kind of the concept of like the popular thing is I want to get my arms bigger. I want to grow my arms. And so people will apply appropriate concepts to reach that endpoint goal, which is high volume R training. They might train their arms multiple times per week. But remember, this is an important thing to remember, is look at the size of that muscle.
Yeah.
Like, again,
would you look at
that? Let's go back to the first time you experienced the most robust changes in your physique. When you first started going from zero stimulus to flooring your car and getting a lot, like that's relative, or that's akin to a flood of stimulus from 0 to just even lifting 3 sets for 8 to 12.
Yeah, it happened fast now that I think about it.
So what happens, where do you see those most robust changes? In your largest muscle groups, of course. Those are survivalist muscle groups. Those are the ones that need to, like your calves.
It was still arms for me.
I'm sure your arms were probably a prominent area that grew, definitely.
He's genetically the strongest berry picker.
Yeah.
We need to give this boy strong and long arms.
But you need to think of it as what makes sense biologically. It doesn't make sense to put a ton of mass distally. So let's say you wanted Frank McGrath forearms and you did forearms every single day of the week. You'd hypertrophy, the muscle would look different over time, but you're never going to have Popeye arms because it denies function. Basically, now that's way more force at the shoulder, and now you're going to have dysfunction at the shoulder. And I do think that's actually the root of a lot of people's dysfunctional patterns and injuries, probably in powerlifting too. And that adds another dimension to it. So what did we get? 5 slices of the 14 slicer? Is that to some point, there is a necessity for accessory work, hypertrophy work for the bodybuilder too, not just because it gets more volume in there in the week, but you're going beyond just that one plane of motion. So true to the person who says, well, that's not high specificity. Fact, that's a valid statement. However, you can imagine the person who just goes and is a wood chopper all the time. He only trains in that one plane every day. Where are his overuse injuries going to occur? You're obviously going to get muscle imbalance. And what do we know about muscle? Is it pulls joint to joint together. So you can't tell me that if I only train in this plane all the time, that's really focused on this, bringing these two joints together, and I really develop that, but not other things, that it's not going to cause dysfunction at the joint over time. So I say that because I have about dysfunction probably 95% of the joints of my body now, but I think that's another thing to consider for people, is that some of that accessory work should include either prehab type work or genuine assistive stuff. We got back to programming. I'm sorry.
What was that?
We got back to programming. I'm sorry. We were supposed to be past that.
That's all you want to talk about.
I apologize.
I think there is some research to back that up, as far as talking about not necessarily as far as your joint, but if you're talking in terms of strictly muscle hypertrophy and exercise variation.
Yeah, it would make sense.
It might have been Eduardo de Souza. I'm not sure, but it was basically one group squatting versus one group squatting and doing leg press, and it was.
Is the volume equated?
Perhaps it may have been.
At
least as far as sets and reps and that kind of thing. I don't know how you would volume equate squats and leg press.
Right.
But I guess it was the leg press group had hypertrophy and like more heads of their quadriceps than.
And again,
squatting.
It makes logical sense. I mean, it's like saying I'm going to get back hypertrophy from my bench press because I'm doing a static to get arch.
Activate them laps, bro.
It's obviously not going to happen. You need to stimulate the tissue externally, not just yourself. And that comes down to one of the essential natures of hypertrophy is that you need the eccentric stretching, loaded stretching of muscle to stimulate hypertrophy. Anyway, I think we've probably exhausted those things.
Yeah, but I think that's it's, even as long as it took. I think the beautiful part of, I kept thinking the whole time I was hearing you guys talk. I was like, yeah, if you want it to grow, you have to give it a reason to grow, and it should be that simple.
Yeah.
You need to just give it stuff.
Yep.
It's the same thing as like watering a plant. Like, if for some reason I feel like it's been so lost with this crossover argument, like, is powerlifting helpful or is this helpful or is this not helpful?
Yeah.
And I think it's really simple. It's like, if you were the rock thrower guy and that was your job, like, how would you make your rock throwing skills better? Like, you would just throw more rock. Like, it's that simple. And I feel like when people say, what's the best way to maintain my mass and do this and get the, and it's just, as what does Dr. Lineker always say? Just work out. He always says, just work out.
Yeah.
Just go and work out. Like, just go in there and figure it out. And I think when I hear the discussions back and forth, another thing Jeremy says, he says, leave the science for the scientists.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's big overarching science that we should talk about. But, man, like, if you're just dudes in the gym, I don't think an mTOR conversation is... It's just...
Right.
It's not applicable.
Well, the funny thing about it is you're talking about two completely different purposes. The scientist is not trying to get you bro huge.
Right.
He's trying to pursue it to a deeper level to understand it more mechanistically. And usually for funding purposes, he needs to so they can get funding to make a drug to work on that pathway or something.
Yeah.
Sorry. But...
Sorry.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be most applicable to you. And if it is, man, the magnitude of the level for you to worry about is like, no, worry about those core principles. Don't worry about the most new flashy, you should read it maybe for entertainment and down the road to go back to it. But man, if you're still, middle of the road or making progress, just keep doing the important things. You don't need to make it. You can kill it at a certain point with obsession of detail.
Yeah. And I kind of feel bad sometimes when, and Alberto Nunez always says, he's like, man, I have to be honest, I feel bad for the new kids that came in. And he was like, when I came in, he was like, the pretty much the advice she got was like, all right, we'll go in there, train, progressive overload, have a good day.
Yep, train the compound list.
Yeah, and like if you're a new kid now, and this is why I think there's so much confusion about the question. And I'll tell you my personal story, how I did it mentally and physically. With bodybuilding, I did a lot of bodybuilding training. My frequency was rather low with the compounds, once a week or something like that, maybe squat twice a week at most. And it was because at that level mentally, I was still interested in that bodybuilding style challenge. Like I wanted to get up there and compete and get on stage. So mentally I was good there. I was ready. And physically, pretty much anything would have worked in the early stages of me working out. Like pretty much anything. Like I could have swam and gotten hypertrophy in the very early stages of my muscular development. Then I got to a point where I aged and I went through the pro ranks and I competed against some of the best pros. And I said, okay, well, I want to make improvements. Then I said, I need to get better. And like you said, the inevitable, get better at programming. And I had to. And we're in the sect that I found that was best at programming.
The dark side.
It just happened to be powerlifting.
Yeah.
I don't care if the best program. Don't knock the table.
Yeah, I know. It's just...
I don't care. I don't care. I wouldn't have cared if the best programming came from hockey players. I would have went to hockey camps and figured out how to do it.
Yep.
Programming applicable to me.
Dude, that's what Ronnie says. He's like, I found the smartest guy in the class, and I went and studied from him. It's like when he talks about his Flex Wheeler story.
Yeah.
Dude, it's a smart way to go about things.
That's what he did. Yeah, exactly.
And he told me to take some vitamin C.
Funny, man.
Yep.
But to finish, essentially, I feel like I got into powerlifting because I needed, at first, my mental stimulus and physical stimulus was easier with bodybuilding. It was just fun. It was fun to go to the gym and just kind of do those.
It's more lighthearted. There's no doubt.
Yeah, but I just wanted more of a mental kind of involvement with it, and powerlifting definitely does that. Yep. So it's not, and
especially execution of the movements.
Exactly.
Like my brain is just processing when because you have to think about what you're doing.
Yeah, it's like you go from the bodybuilding style workouts. To me, it felt like hanging out with my friends. I feel like it's fun. Like it's something I like to do. But with powerlifting, I feel like it's like, all right, I'm done with college. I need to really get in my career now. Like I feel serious about my lifting now. Like not that I wasn't with bodybuilding.
It's just different.
Yeah, it's just different.
I still think though, just I guess play devil's advocate. It's like it's all about like your mindset.
Yeah.
And like you can do that same exact thing with bodybuilding. For sure. Because for me, just being in, it was almost like reversed. Like I guess up until this point where it's like things like start hurting with powerlifting, but I think as a bodybuilder, I was much stricter and like a much more rigid person in general. Like I learned the method of flexible dieting, I guess you would say, but it wasn't right away. So I did it the hard way first. Learned it the hard way being like I only ate chicken, rice, broccoli, literally.
And French's.
Yes, of course.
Do you have any great poupon?
And then going into like flexible dieting, but even still in the balance of that, if people wanted to try to get me to like eat something that like wasn't in my macros, or like I couldn't track it, like, and I was prepping, like, wouldn't eat it.
Oh yeah.
Like never. So I would still get hyper serious about it, and even with my training, like, I would still write stuff down, and like, even though I wasn't, like, I would do stuff differently. Like I would squat, but maybe one day I would squat like a little differently than the other day, just like like try it out. Like it didn't really matter that much. But yeah, as far as like the mental thing, like I remember doing like sets of lunges and like just with dumbbells, and like the feeling of like taking those steps and like really thinking about that and thinking about the muscle contracting. And the same thing with like even like random like sets of like dumbbell like chest press and like stuff like that.
So I think that's actually an excellent point to bring up, because maybe a more appropriate way of saying it is powerlifting helped me tap into that, where it's not exclusive to powerlifting per se. Because even now, because by default, I can't really train the traditional powerlifting style that I was before. I have to do a lot more hypertrophy work. Just because I still do like training, and I just, out of pain, I can't do everything I want to. And I lift actually with a more bodybuilding type program, but the way I actually lift the weights is like a powerlifter now. Right. Which basically, when I say it, I just mean more focused on what I'm doing and more kind of tuned into the movement. So I guess powerlifting made me appreciate the importance of that, where it's...
Yeah, that's really interesting, because like literally exact opposite.
Wow. That is crazy.
I bodybuilded first, and then like it just gave me a reference of like, okay, I know what that feels like when I do that. Like that's how it's supposed to feel. That's how that muscle is supposed to feel like when I contract it. And then it's like, so like when I squat, it's like I don't have the greatest squat or anything, but like doing anything, I just know internally, like, or muscularly, okay, that didn't feel like it was supposed to feel like so that muscle is not doing what I wanted to do.
You bring up a really
that sounds like really bro, but it's like it's thinking very just internally, like in my body. Even though I guess powerlifting, a lot of people would say powerlifting is more like external focus, like on the cues, like on the load and on the weight and the cues.
Well, I think something that you really do touch on there that is a physiological thing that we didn't quite touch on is motor patterning, motor learning. Because what you can say there, and another essential separation of a bodybuilder versus there's actually a couple classical examples we saw at Raw Nationals of guys with great brute strength who had terrible execution and lost when they had actually the physical potential to win. They had all the other things in line, but not the execution. So what I want to touch on with that is so you can't just see training as an adaptation as just the adaptations you want, meaning when you train and you do your programming, you're not just getting hypertrophy adaptations and strength adaptations. You're also getting neurological adaptations, which obviously, yes, strength is neurological. But what I mean in that is I'm talking more specifically about motor patterns. And I'll use a more broad example of that is like you get motor learning from playing an instrument too, musically. That's how you kind of remember and you get faster over time. But I'm not going to expect that motor learning to really carry over to my powerlifting performance.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I wanted to illustrate for within your example, because I think it is a really, really strong point, is that you learned how to train muscles in isolation rather than, you trained and pushed the adaptation to be better in isolation type work rather than highly more coordinated with large, which is the gross motor control. And that's very interesting because that would take a lot of time to now relearn and go back. So great point, and something that I do think highlights another aspect physiologically of the difference is most bodybuilders tend to train as seeing everything in isolation.
Yeah, and I had after Raw Nationals, I had my first bodybuilding full workout. I didn't do any compound or anything, and I've been kind of doing it this week. And I kind of get what Jake is saying, and that's what I do really like about bodybuilding. So like, it was pitiful. I used 70-pound dumbbells, and I did chest. What's it called? Dumbbell chest press. Yeah, dumbbell chest press. I always like the
chest and pressing.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, this should be easy. Like I literally just benched 385. Like I just should be nothing. And man, it was. I was and then like Jake said, the first thing I thought, like I had my form of bench form, and then I instantly put my heels up and I started lifting my neck up with every press, and I was like, now the muscle feels right. Like I had a completely different train set, like how to put, like even with curls, I did curls, and I was like, no, that is not the exact angle of like supination. It's like, and every time I guess I am in a biomechanically more efficient or correct position, I get rewarded through the feeling that it gives the muscle, as opposed to powerlifting. I don't care how my muscles feel really.
It's like feedback, like between
yeah. I get skeletal muscle from bodybuilding. It gives me a rewarding every rep skeletal muscle feedback on how I executed the motion. And with powerlifting, my skeletal muscle, I don't look to it for a feeling of feedback. What I looked for is more so like, it almost feels like dancing. It's like a finesse.
So that's what I was going to say, is like, really, to kind of simplify it, is with bodybuilding is you're manipulating the load to your body, whereas powerlifting, you're manipulating your body to the load.
Yeah, wow, that's actually very, very well put. That's pretty break.
If you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly, I think, the differences of them. And I'm sorry, I'll shut up after this and let you finish your point. That's the really funny thing about powerlifting, is you have to let gravity play its course. Because if you think about a straight line, you want to stay in that, and that's what gravity is going to do, is pull it just straight down. Right. So anyway, I'm sorry. And Jake's right. I think it's a personality thing. Like, yeah.
And I was still even just thinking about like how you said that, and like how I think about doing the lifts. Maybe this is why I'm not the greatest powerlifter, but it's like a weird thought process. So like, it almost still is like, I still do think like when I bench press, for instance, like my mind isn't like, it's weird. Like I'm not really thinking about like this, like I'm thinking about like, okay, what is my chest? I'm still thinking about that.
Yeah, it's deep rooted.
It's not the same. It's not the same, like I'm not trying to fatigue my chest necessarily like I would be like with like bodybuilding.
Yep.
Like I'm not trying to, I guess, get the hardest contraction possible necessarily, but I have a mental reference of when I execute the movement properly. Like,
Reggie, give us a yes quick.
Okay, that's what it feels like.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now we can move on.
And with squatting, I guess it's a little bit different. It's like, since there's so many, like bench press, I think about my hips for part of it, but it's like, with squatting, it's like, okay, it's in sequence almost. It's like,
it is.
This. Yep. Okay, those all like checked through that, like those all felt normal. Like,
yep. Shameless plug. Actually, the ingredients in Utopian do help with motor learning.
That's right. They do actually.
Yeah.
Read our write-up. I'm with you, Jake. I'm with you on that one. And I felt that yesterday, and man, it felt phenomenal. Like it felt like an old girlfriend, and like it felt like man, I haven't felt you in a long time or something like that.
It's like I think in some way it can be helpful as far as form, at least in the way that like I think when people a lot of times just get started in powerlifting and they're new to lifting weights like just in general, they don't notice when they have like bad posture, or like
Yeah, you don't know.
when I try to cue them to change something, like they don't have a reference of like,
Yep.
when I do this, that's what
they
it
don't
looks
have
like.
the proper reference.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's
So that's kinesthesia or I forget what it's called. It's kinesthetic awareness.
Oh,
where your
okay.
joints are in space. Yeah.
So yeah, like it's almost like
Invented
that's
by Charles Glass.
it's almost like that's missing.
Come on, baby. Squeeze, baby. I love you, man. I think that is a kinesthetic awareness. Is that what it is? That awareness, and I think, like I heard you saying earlier, it's deep rooted, and I think it may come from a lot of us on what you did previously, because I know with bodybuilding, I liked it because it felt like, it literally felt like runner's high. It felt like I was like exhausting a muscle or doing so, and then like it gave me a positive feeling, and like I feel like I worked my body. That's how I felt.
Definitely.
But with powerlifting, the feeling I get from it,
You've drained your body.
Yeah, it wrecks you. But for me, powerlifting, if you guys are right-handed, it feels like using my right hand, and like a good powerlifting session feels like riding with your right hand, and being off feels like a bad lift feels like, man, I did that with my left hand.
Yeah,
that's like the best way I can compare
definitely.
it. And so
because the lines are a lot less linear.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think like it feels like brushing your teeth right. It just feels right. It's like a
it's efficiency is what you're talking about.
Exactly, which is efficiency, and I think it's kind of messed up because it can really ruin your day if you have a bad session, because you don't get that completed feeling.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like Jake had some bad squat days a few weeks ago.
Yes, it did.
Every time he would come up to me and be like, "I'm never squatting again," and then he was squatting in like 2 days. Like, and he would say that every time after every session.
I hated it every time.
I hope this doesn't.
It's frustrating, so I just kept going back.
I hope it doesn't turn people off to this statement, but I think personally, when I hear that, it actually rings something into my head, which is, I think you feel like more of an athlete in powerlifting.
I feel like an athlete.
Yeah.
I'm doing athletic
because what you just described is like hitting the sweet spot on a baseball bat when you hit a home run.
Absolutely. It just feels like
you're looking for the sweet spot,
yeah,
and you can't feel the sweet spot when you're on stage posing.
Yeah, it's like you have
and actually it feels
craft.
uncomfortable when you're posing right.
I hate posing.
I love posing.
I hate working out. I'm just gonna stop working out. Is it okay if I'm just
Jake the IT guy?
We'll call you Jake, soft body.
Good. Okay.
Kirby.
Peabody. Hey, this is Jake Peabody. You have to change your voice.
Kirby the IT guy.
Peabody. Oh man, that was like 7 slices, so half a pie today.
Half pie.
I think that was our longest podcast ever. That's pretty good. Wow, that's pretty long. Reggie, want to come give a good sign off? We got Reggie here. Reggie works for Denova Nutrition. Reggie, come here to me.
Come here, my boy.
Yes.
So you got to tell him?
Yes.
You want... You just give an outro for us.
Thank you very much for listening. I really don't have anything to say.
I had a few words.
Those are good. It's a very soothing voice.
It is.
Thank you.
This is Reginald on WKA 107.
Signing off.
All right. Thank you guys. As always, talk to you next week.